squadron leader Brian Dunn. The reception party, including there, well, the Princess Royal, as you can see, who has accompanied her mother's coffin throughout its journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and again from Edinburgh to London. Well, that was the scene not very long ago at RAF Norfolk. Now, this, as predicted, in the gloom as evening descends in London, the crowds that have gathered along this route, a 15-mile or so route, as I say, from the RAF base to the west of London, all the way into Buckingham Palace. The route taking in Eastbourne Terrace, Lancaster Gate, Bayswater Road, then down the Marble Arch.
The same route as Diana then, only the Queen's not going to Kensington Palace.
Final few hundred yards.
It's ironic, isn't it? Prince Charles was at Norfolk to witness Diana. He collected the body, but he's not there to collect his mum, but she's going to Buckingham anyway, so that would explain that.
Helicopter shots there of the cortege making its way slowly through the gloomy streets of West London. The crowds scattered along that road. It is, as you can see for yourself, a dual carriageway at the moment, and so the crowd's fairly sparse. It's not like that when we get into the pavements and the streets in the centre of London itself. It's certainly not like that around Buckingham Palace, where I am now, where we can see hundreds, thousands of people waiting patiently for their moment to glimpse, to see that coffin bearing Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, to see for themselves, to be part of a moment, a true moment that will be remembered for generations, centuries to come in British history, for them to say that, in part, that I was there, but in the main to say that I was there to pay my own respects, to have my own private thoughts about what the royal family meant to me. Many of them we've talked, haven't we, over the last few days, and will over the weeks to come, about the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people she met during the course of her reign, the impression she made, each and every one of those people having their own particular story to tell. And now, so many of them wanting to be here to see something that's been ever present almost in their lives. The statistic, the bare statistic, that more than 80% of the population of the UK have never known any other monarch. Of course, they haven't other than Queen Elizabeth II. Well, the new monarch, King Charles, has had a busy day himself. It continues. He spent the day in Northern Ireland, meeting representatives there of all communities, and then attending a service of tribute and reflection for his mother at St Anne's Cathedral in Belfast. He flew back there in about an hour before, back from Belfast, about an hour before, to the same base, to RAF Norfolk, and made his way. We saw him arrive in Buckingham Palace about an hour ago. The Queen Consort with him as well, and they went to receive Coffin, where it will rest overnight for the family members and, of course, members of Buckingham Palace staff to pay their own tributes. And our royal correspondent, Leanna Mills, is here with me as we watch those scenes, and somehow the weather, yeah, I don't know, it seems appropriate, doesn't it, Rhiannon? The gloom, the damp, the drizzle, the undimmed appetite, desire of people to gather, to congregate, to witness to themselves, to pay, as they say, their own respects.
I think it feels so reflective, doesn't it, of that sense of shock that many people are feeling. It is only 7 days ago that in Balmoral the Queen was carrying out that last important constitutional duty. Only 7 days ago, appointing her 15th Prime Minister, who we then saw Liz Truss as part of the welcome party there at RAF Norfolk.
Well, it was exactly a week ago when I was standing in the damp Downing Street, it must be said, while all eyes were on RAF Norfolk for the return of the new Prime Minister.
And to think it feels like it's all happened so quickly. The one thing that really struck me as we saw her coming back in that enormous grey aircraft was just how tiny her coffin looked in it. And yes, she was tiny really in physical stature, but she was the most enormous international figure. And what we're seeing now, and what we've already seen to a degree in Edinburgh, is the fact that she had just this incredible impact beyond measure. Yes, on dignitaries, on politicians that she had those important official meetings with, but also with the people now that we are seeing lining the streets. So many of them have their own memories of her, whether they've simply seen her on television, whether they've gathered outside of Buckingham Palace before for those big milestone moments, or whether they'd actually met her in person, and they talk about her kindness and her connection. And so if you look at the hearse there, you can see there are lights inside the hearse, and that is deliberate. I've just had some information through which said the state hearse.
So it could be 20 years, right, before the next person dies, like Prince Charles, King Charles or whoever. And, you know, I mean, this is going to be useless really, isn't it?
For this hearse. It's finished in royal claret, the same colour as official royal and state vehicles that are kept in the Royal Mews at Buckingham Palace and used by members of the royal family on official duties. The vehicle also features Her Majesty the Queen's personal royal cipher, and they say the state hearse was designed to make sure that members of the public have a clear view of her coffin as it travels on this journey, but also after her funeral, as it travels from London to Windsor.
Well, you can see that illustrated right now in that darkening evening with the lights.
So basically,
illuminating,
despite what they're saying, it's only going to do one job.
And you have to remember that accompanying her on all the final journeys we've seen so far, the movement from Balmoral to Edinburgh, then Edinburgh back to RAF Norfolk, and now this final journey here to Buckingham Palace, she has at all times been accompanied by her daughter, Princess Anne. And as the plane flew into RAF Norfolk, we were given a statement from the Princess Royal in which she said, "I was fortunate to share the last 24 hours of my dearest mother's life. It has been an honour and a privilege to accompany her on her final journeys. Witnessing the love and respect shown by so many on these journeys has been both humbling and uplifting. We will all share unique memories. I offer my thanks to each and every one who share their own sense of loss. We may have been reminded how much of her presence and contribution to our national identity we took for granted. I am also so grateful for the support and understanding offered to my dear brother Charles as he accepts the added responsibilities of the monarch. To my mother, the Queen, thank you."
I'm going to bring in Patrick Harrison on that, but first of all, Patrick, obviously, just explain, you used to be press secretary for Charles, Prince Charles, as he then was. Just you're saying it's sinking in now as you witness that scene.
Yeah.
Of a woman you knew so well.
Yes, indeed. And it's incredibly poignant, isn't it? I mean, we've already had many poignant moments, but here is another one. And people waiting patiently in the gloom, showing the kind of stoicism and constancy which they associate with Her Majesty. Now, desperate and keen to pay their final respects to this woman who has been a constant in their lives for so many years. And fascinating to get that detail that you've just explained about the hearse. Was so important in the planning of all this that members of the public who wait for hours for a glimpse get a real opportunity to see the coffin as it goes
Very
past.
practical in
Very
many
practical,
ways.
yeah.
Making sure that,
Well, we
as
know-
in life, in death, as many people as possible were able to see her. She always said she had to be seen to be believed. And now, as the coffin slowly makes its way here towards Buckingham Palace, that's exactly what's happening with those lights inside the house.
And Patrick, on that statement that Rhiannon just read out, a personal statement by the Princess Royal, just that last bit of it, we're seeing it very clearly, aren't we? The senior royals, the two eldest children of Her Majesty, really, I don't know, taking control. The Princess Royal travelling with that coffin from Balmoral to Edinburgh, from Edinburgh to London, and the King doing his duties, travelling around the realm, now waiting at Buckingham Palace to receive the coffin.
Well, absolutely. Both the Queen and the Princess Royal have always enjoyed a very close relationship. And of course, both were very close to their mother, so it seems a very appropriate way in which they're performing those dual roles. I thought it was particularly notable that the Princess Royal was part of the vigil last night. That's the first time that a woman has been part
Because it's also been called the Vigil of the Princes.
Vigil of the Princes, absolutely. So there we've seen a change there, which I think is a very significant one and a very welcome one, that the Princess Royal was part of that vigil. And of course she has accompanied her mother from Balmoral all the way down to Edinburgh, and now today from Edinburgh all the way down to London. And as we're seeing now, through the centre of London, back to the palace that everybody associates with the royal family, Buckingham Palace, the site of so many royal events over the years, and I'm sure they're all coming into our minds now as we watch these pictures as the Queen makes her final journey back to Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, that's, we understand, somewhere around Shepherd's Bush, for those that know London, and the crowds much deeper there, some cheering, obviously the flash of the cameras, and on the other side of the road you can see the traffic jams. Well, I'm sure they're not too upset to be stopping themselves in that traffic fog. You get a glimpse out the window at the hearse carrying the coffin of Her Majesty the Queen to Buckingham Palace. Let's talk again to our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce. Alistair, it's a very modern, industrial scene in a sense, the centre of one of the world's greatest cities, but it echoes in antiquity as well, the bearing of a monarch ultimately to her final place of rest.
London was bombed and bleeding during the Blitz. She lived through that and watched her father, the King, deal with the challenges of wartime. She then joined the army, joined the Army Territorial Service, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and then through her reign, London has grown exponentially. It has changed, it has evolved. It is a totally different city from the one that she found herself returning to in 1952 and in which she was crowned a year later. But it's a city that she loved to work from. She turned where she lived at Buckingham Palace into a real home, and she was able from there to meet all members of her household, her private secretaries, regular meetings with the Prime Minister every week that Parliament was in session. And she really is coming home. And all the way in through what is a busy city, returning at the end of a day's work, they are weaving her through this scene while people will want to salute their sovereign passing by, albeit fleetingly. But lit as she is with the Royal Standard, it catches on a dreary evening the reds, the golds, the blues, that tell a story about the nation that she ruled as sovereign, and it also has marked wherever she's been throughout her reign. Occasionally she flew her own standards when she went to Commonwealth countries, but pretty much everywhere she was, the Royal Standard flew, and London cabbies knew when she was home. It was something to look out for people coming to Buckingham Palace as part of their tourist visit, and that is now the case for her son the King, who will be waiting for the return of his mother. He'll be joined obviously by Princess Anne, who's coming with the Queen here, but all four of the Queen's children will be waiting, their spouses, and all of the Queen's grandchildren, all 8 of them with their spouses too. So a real homecoming for the Queen to her capital city, to her palace, and to her home.
And Alistair, to her place of birth, her city of birth, though she wasn't born at Buckingham Palace.
No, 17 Bruton Street, just up the road, doesn't really exist now in quite the same way that it did. And in fact, I think there's a hotel where she was born now, and certainly her parents then moved to our house on Piccadilly. And the intention was that she'd be, yes, a royal princess, but the daughter of one of the King's younger brothers. But then that king abdicated, left the United Kingdom, went to live in France, and her father became king, absolutely, in his view, ill-prepared for it. And at least the Queen had a few years to study from her father all the constitutional elements of what she needed to do. And so when he died very young, she was well prepared on the one sense, but she had in her principal advisor, Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill, she knighted him, actually gave him the Order of the Garter quite soon after she acceded to the throne. And he was responsible for preparing her for the first stages of that reign. And I think it was quite significant that waiting for her at Northolt was the 15th Prime Minister of her reign, who she had only invited to form a government a week ago today.
Quite extraordinary, the pace of events when you describe them like that. And Alistair, as we look at the hearse, and we've heard what you've told us, what Rhiannon's told us about the special design to allow people to get their view of the cortege, of the coffin itself.
Still a waste of money,
Of course,
though.
that coffin has been a long time in the design. English oak, 30 years in the design, and lead lined.
There is a wonderful cheer happening here. In the pouring rain for the Queen. Yes, it's weighted. It's sad that now its duty has come to, but the care we're going to see in all the details surrounding the preparation of this final salute from the United Kingdom to their sovereign of over 70 years will be very moving. I think when she arrives at Buckingham Palace, a very intimate moment will take place. Not only will she be met by her family, but she was appointed in 1942 by her father in the middle of the war to be Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. And when she became sovereign, obviously she became Colonel-in-Chief of that regiment, but she also became the company commander of her own company, known as Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards. And when she arrives at Buckingham Palace, her own company will step forward and they will form the Barra Party to carry her into her palace. Her relationship with the Grenadier Guards is the longest that she has with any military organisation. And so the intimacy of that relationship is entirely profound.
Well, Patrick Harrison, Charles's former press secretary, is here with me as we work out where that cortege is, which not too very far away now from Buckingham Palace, 15-20 minutes perhaps, and just so struck by obviously the size of the crowds that have gathered here, being added to by the moment, people being able to follow the progress of the state hearse on their phones, updating themselves on the information, but also just the patience.
It's very noticeable.
Stillness.
The stillness. There's been a change of atmosphere over the last 20 minutes or so as a stillness has descended, if you like, by Buckingham Palace. We've been watching it here, and as it becomes darker and darker, and people watching on their phones,
Some cheers there,
knowing that the hearse is coming closer and closer towards them. Of course, this is a feature of the event as it's happening now, that people can follow it, of course, on their phones in the crowd. So everybody waiting outside patiently under their umbrellas know exactly where we are in the process as we come towards Buckingham Palace.
And interesting, there was some whooping and cheering. I mean, it's not the funeral, and that's people showing their appreciation.
Yeah,
Absolutely. In Edinburgh as well, we heard cheers as well as a hushed silence. But I think when you see the speed of the hearse relatively slowly driving past, it does slow down the pace of what we've seen unfold in a relatively short space of time. It was only on Thursday evening that her death was announced. And in some ways there has at times felt like this frenetic pace as we've tried to come to terms with her death, but also the process and the ceremonial that has to happen because we automatically have a new king. And of course, King Charles has guided us through that in many ways. And I think what's been very striking to me is how the royal family have wanted us all to feel involved. It was made clear at a briefing that was held by the palace that yes, for him, of course, the state duties kick in immediately. That is, of course, important to him. He knows he has to continue the constitutional role that he's been handed by his mother. But his primary role, he believes at the moment, is to lead the nation, lead his family, lead the world in this moment of mourning and making sure that we all feel part of that. Already Scotland had their moment. They were able to pay this very fulsome tribute because of the nature of the fact she died in Scotland. And now she's making her way into central London, where so many people have gathered over the years to join with her in those huge celebrations for those milestone moments. And isn't it breathtaking in many ways to think that it was only in June, the start of June, that many of us were here as the crowds again gathered and cheered for her as she walked out onto the balcony at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by her family. And that is why this final return is going to feel so poignant to so many.
It's just I beg people who may just be joining us that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is making Her final journey home, well, home to Buckingham Palace, was that the state hearse, a simple cortege of 5 or 6 cars, one of them containing a daughter, the Princess Royal, and her husband following behind. Those 3 police outriders at the front accompany the hearse through the dark, damp streets of West London. It's transported, that hearse and the coffin, down the A40 on its way to Buckingham Palace. It landed at RAF Norfolk in West London, well, about 45, that's 50 minutes ago, just before 7 o'clock this evening. Heavens opened, the drizzle started, a grey sky descended, and night has fallen. And as we've been seeing through all the traffic there, the stopped traffic, people managing, depending on the nature of the streets, the hearse is passing through to grab a moment or two to pay their own farewells and respects to that hearse. So we are now 15 or 20 minutes away from the hearse and the coffin arriving at Buckingham Palace to be received by the King, and then it will rest in the bowroom in Buckingham Palace overnight before being moved in procession through the centre of London. All those ceremonial sites where so many Trooping the Colours took place, so many jubilees in actual fact, into Westminster Hall, where thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people will be able to pay their respects until Monday morning, the day of the state funeral itself. And Patrick Harrison, you mentioned that Vigil of the Princes. We will see that again, we expect, but we don't know precisely when, in Westminster Hall.
Yes, I don't think we have the details of that yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But obviously that lying in state in Westminster Hall is an incredibly important opportunity for the people who will queue, no doubt, for hours to pay their respects to the late Queen.
It is quite a sight. It was quite a sight last night. Wasn't it? Just those moments. You mentioned Princess Royal there. Just those royals in their reflection and members of the public walking past.
Absolutely, and also when you think about that incredibly busy schedule that the King has and other members of the royal family have, to have that moment where they are standing quietly in reflection for their mother by the coffin was I thought an incredibly poignant moment for the King, who otherwise has such a very busy schedule.
And just to reflect on another poignant moment is the hearse and coffin passes along the West Way in central London, the elevated section of the A40, and of course passes Grenfell Tower, swathed, empty, a memorial for those who died in that awful conflagration 4 or 5 years ago. One remembers, Leanne, and then the thoughts of Her Majesty the Queen that she expressed so volubly about that tragedy.
She did, and she visited with Prince William, and I remember those pictures coming in, and you had people literally wailing at times in the background as Prince William accompanied his grandmother. But it was one of those moments where she realised that she needed to provide this figure of stability and reassurance, and also reminding us that certainly over the last few years her family have very much stepped in to help support her. It was an incredibly moving day. Around also that same time, I remember her going up to Manchester around the time of the Manchester Arena bombing and standing by the bedside of a young girl who'd been injured and just saying it was wicked what happened.
Of course, it's the dual role of monarchy, isn't it? It's to be there, celebrate the moments, but also to be there in those moments of tragedy as well.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people reflected on the fact that the Queen was so private and sometimes unemotional. We didn't often see her shed a tear in public, but it didn't mean that she was uncaring. She connected with people and showed that sense of reassurance and care in a whole multitude of ways, and who can forget the speech that she she made that national address during the coronavirus pandemic where she said, we will meet again, and the reassurance that that brought to so many at what was an incredibly difficult time.
One or two flowers, single stems being thrown from the crowd there.
You're knocking me film up, love.
As the
Hey,
cortege
I knew, hey.
descends to Westbourne Terrace from the less accessible
Good shot now.
elevated section of the A40, to say now people can really get closer to the hearse, to the coffin, to get those photographs. And as we've been saying, Patrick, it's designed for that purpose. The state hearse, they want to show that coffin. They want people to see,
Absolutely.
to share the moment.
Absolutely. As Rianne mentioned earlier, this is the king leading the nation in mourning. And in all the plans that underpin what we're seeing now, it is about ensuring that the public can share in that, in this moment, and able to, in their way, share in the moment, express their sorrow and also their thankfulness for the Queen.
Let's talk to Alistair again, our royal commentator. And Alistair, it's the simplicity of this cortege. A hearse, a few cars, outriders, yes. But the contrast with what we will see when the full force, the might of the British state and its armed forces pay tribute to a monarch in a state funeral. It's going to be very, very, very different. But something about the simplicity of this, it's not even a formal ceremony.
No, and it's for every family that has lost someone that they love very dearly. Following a hearse is very often a part of the funerary process, and it carries its sense of finality. And people react to it in different ways. Death is so challenging to every emotion and sense, and the way people mourn is always different. But this is somebody who everybody knew, and therefore everybody, as Princess Anne said in her statement, is dealing with it with their own memories. But the cohesive reality of seeing the late sovereign, who was so sparkly eyed with that almost impish young grin when she was waiting to meet her 15th Prime Minister. It's difficult to realise that that smile has gone. And yet, you're right, tomorrow, after this rain-covered return, she will be swept into a royal procession of all the armed forces, making their way from the palace where she lived to the grandeur of that massive Westminster Hall, where coronation processions have been formed back into the medieval times, where Parliament used to meet in the ancient times and built by William II. And in a sense it will be the gathering point for her ancestors to call her back from life to join the annals of history. And the way in which it will be done will be so elegantly perfect, so nobly and carefully measured, that I think without doubt it will be something that all of us can join with and feel a part of.
And we still watch those scenes as the cortege makes its way through the centre of London, getting ever closer now to Buckingham Palace, just to the north side of Hyde Park. And notable there that some of the drivers getting out of their cars, people on bicycles dismounting, clapping, taking photographs earlier, one or two single flowers being thrown towards the hearse. Traffic jams well, a regular feature of commuting or driving in central London. I don't think anyone caught up in them today regrets that at all, because they've been causing them themselves. They've been able to see the hearse carrying the Queen's coffin towards Buckingham Palace and towards a personal greeting, a personal farewell from members of her own family, led by, of course, the new King, King Charles, the Queen Consort, her other children, and their children, her grandchildren will greet and receive that coffin here at Buckingham Palace before it's borne for one last night in Buckingham Palace into the bowroom there, where they will be able to have their own private thoughts, where members of staff at Buckingham Palace will be able to have a thought or two before it is moved. And as Alistair was telling us, before really the state takes over, then we realise the monarch is gone, the Queen is dead, long live the King. The movement of that coffin tomorrow at 2:22 precisely, that planning will take the coffin a very short distance to Westminster Hall. The crowds are already there, we've been reporting on them. Some people, let's just listen to some of the sounds there, some of the people no doubt on those pavements witnessing the hearse for themselves will now go to the banks of the Thames, all the way back to the Tower of London, and start queuing to be some of the people who will be able to witness for themselves that official, the lying in state. We're now approaching Marble Arch, the end of Oxford Street, London's main shopping street. A right turn then down Park Lane and bring it down to Hyde Park Corner, and then the last short stretch down Constitution Hill into Buckingham Palace. Patrick Harrison, and a route that was just, now we're so close to the palace, just second nature to her Majesty.
She has made this route many times, and obviously very familiar part of London to Her Majesty and all those members of the royal family who are waiting to receive her in Buckingham Palace. And it's very striking, isn't it, this very public procession of the hearse into Buckingham Palace and then back into that personal family moment overnight with members of the royal family and also members of the royal household. And you don't need me to tell you that loyalty is hugely prized within the household, and the household will very much wish to pay their own respects across this evening as well. And before, as you say, she then makes that journey over to Westminster Hall, where the state then takes over. So you've got a public journey into a private family and household moment overnight, and then across into that state moment later on, which of course tomorrow then begins the lying in state, where members of the public can then pay their respects.
Alistair, Bruce, we're only half a mile or so away now as we look at the aerial shot of Park Lane approaching Hyde Park Corner. And not too long before you see the arrival of the hearse at the gates of Buckingham Palace, before it goes through the grand entrance and will be received by members of her family.
Dermot, you were mentioning how Londoners seeing this glimpse of the Queen going past. Londoners are so used over the last 20, 30, 40 years to just wandering along the pavements and suddenly seeing the Queen's car come past as she went off to the City of London or to open something here or there all around London. And They've come out tonight and they're seeing the sovereign pass through these roads for the final time. And Londoners have responded very warmly to the Queen throughout her reign because she's been such a constant. After watching her son, the King, recall and reflect upon the loss of Queen Elizabeth II and make so much of the Constitution, it is fitting that her last part of this journey will be up Constitution Hill. She passed there also Apsley House, and every year she used to receive a tricolour from the Duke of Wellington, who was her friend, to recall the Battle of Waterloo in the schedule of events that she did every year. Along Constitution Hill, she will come to the Queen Victoria Memorial and to Buckingham Palace. She'll pass by the memorial to the Royal Air Force bombers from the Second World War, which she unveiled not all that long ago. And this is where the nation has had its eyes since we got the news that the Queen had died. People have been gathering at this palace, the icon of her reign and of the monarchy itself. In the journey of our late sovereign, this is her final coming home. Passing by the side of the palace where she lived, where she took the dogs for the walks, where she could be alone during the week of her duties. Going around the Queen Victoria Memorial to give more people gathered here a chance to see the Queen. At the end of her coronation in 1953, the great gold stagecoach brought the young Queen through this centre gate to start her reign. Her duty done, she returns to the same palace with such a vast book of duties done, engagements completed. Her service finally completed for the United Kingdom. Within the quadrangle of Buckingham Palace waits the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, 3 officers and 101 guardsmen ready to give a royal salute to their Colonel-in-Chief. State Hearse will have made its way around the Guard of Honour and come underneath the state entrance, which is on the far side from the gate we saw potentially. Waiting there, the royal family, and then inside to the bedroom.
There the scene, the long shot down canal, the Buckingham Palace, the Victoria Memorial there, the Union flags draped, unmoving, the crowds now reflecting, absorbing what they've just seen there, and you will have heard the applause, the cheering. The three cheers for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who's